and get started.
Okay.
Okay, so since it's just this little crew here, tell me a little bit about the contracts that you'd like me to focus on and start with, and then we'll knock those out. Here we go. I've got them all downloaded and I'm ready to go. If you let me pick, I'm happy to pick. Let's start with the buyer brokerage agreement. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about what the buyer brokerage agreement is supposed to do. Okay. The buyer brokerage agreement, and let me see if I can. Let me share my screen with you too. Actually. Okay. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Here's the deal with the buyer brokerage agreement. Okay, there is what the state says about it, right? The licensing commission, and then there's how it works in the field. So I'll walk you through what I mean by all of that. Okay, so according to the state, but by the way, I recommend that everyone read these contracts word for word. Okay, read them word for word. Rewatch these videos if necessary. If you don't understand something in particular, let's talk about it. I want to make sure that not only are you able to answer any questions that one of your prospects or clients might have for you, but that you can do it with confidence and that you know kind of the purpose behind these contracts anyway. Okay, so here's the deal with the buyer brokerage agreement. A buyer brokerage agreement is really the document that the real estate commission has in place that takes you, if you could mute yourself if you're making noise, that would be awesome. Okay, perfect. Just unmute yourself to chat. That's available. Okay, so if you do not sign this buyer brokerage agreement, then the state considers you to be a customer. If you do sign it, then the state considers you to be a client. So let's talk real briefly about what the difference between those two is. So some of you probably remember from real estate school, a customer you're only supposed to do ministerial tasks for. Okay, so what I remember being taught ministerial tasks is essentially things that you can do with your hands and your feet, right? I can look up in the tax records and quote what the tax records say. I can tell you what school district this property is in. I can tell you what the taxes are, and I can tell you what, you know, how many bedrooms and baths it has and what year it was built, and basically a bunch of stuff that you could find for yourself because it's all public information. Okay, hands and feet. I can show you the property, right? As soon as you want me to start using my brain, right, which is giving you advice, talking strategy, pulling the data, pulling the comparables and analyzing those, talking about negotiation tactics and these kind of things, that's where really you should have this document signed. Okay, now I will tell you that people blur the lines for this all the time. Okay, there are literally thousands of realtors at this moment breaking the law because they are not using this document as they should. So there's a lot of resistance sometimes to pushing this document at a seller, or I'm sorry, at a buyer, and saying, hey, I'd like you to formally commit to being my agent, right? Don't be afraid of this document. This is simply a loyalty agreement, okay? If you're gonna call me and you want me to take time away from my family and other clients to prepare for showings, go on the showings, study the comps, you know, kind of get ready to help you, then I want loyalty in return, okay? So what this is a document that, yes, it has its place in the legalities of the real estate commission. However, it can be terminated by either party at any time. So in some respects, it's completely worthless. But it does allow you to kind of lean on the importance of using this document for license law and helping them understand what you can do without it and what you can do with it to help that prospect through the process. Make sense? Now, with that said, I do not recommend pushing this in their face before you earn the right to get that commitment. Okay, so typically what I would do, and again, there's many ways to do this. Typically what I would do is I would have that conversation with them on the telephone. I'd book the appointment. We'd go and have a home buyer seminar, or we'd have a buyer consultation, right? Where you're reviewing, the expectations of the relationship, where you are talking about their needs and their wants and their desires and why those are important to them. And you're helping them, talk a little bit about the lending options, and you're walking them through the due diligence period and all these kind of things, right? You're doing the needs analysis in the buyer consultation. And then I would hand them a copy of this document blank, and basically say, now this is our loyalty agreement. This is the document that takes you from being a customer to being a client. And again, here's what I can do for you as a customer. Here's what I could do for you as a client. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to talk into the right camera. And look, and then I would give them a caveat, and I'd say, look, here's the thing. I don't expect you to sign this today. I expect to earn your business. So what I'd like to do is help you understand what it's like to work with me, right? And if you ask me questions that I should really only answer if I have this signed, I'll let you know. And my intention is to earn your business, right? And we'll go out again. And at the end of that meeting, I'll ask you if you're prepared to formally, establish our relationship as a client-agent relationship. 99 times out of 100, they'll send it to me right then and there, or they'll sign it right then and there. Okay. But if they're resistant to being loyal, then I dig at that a little bit. I don't really want to be one of 6 realtors that they're working with, right? I'm going to ask them a little bit more specific questions, like, so tell me, what do you want to hear from your realtor, or what do you want to see from your realtor, or what do you want that experience to be like, so that you found the right one, right? How do you, what roles do you want the realtor to play for you? What expectations do you have of the realtor, right? So you're trying to figure out, number one, is this person crazy, right? Is this somebody that I'd like to leave my family and go spend time with in exchange for a few $1,000s? And I know I'm kind of saying that in jest, but like that's really what it's about. Is this person going to give me good energy or not good energy? You see what I'm saying? Okay, so that's the document. Eventually, I'd get that signed pretty quickly. So the buyer brokerage agreement, we're going to look at it together at the very top. Oh, and by the way, if they sign it in writing, you just upload it to DocuSign, right? If they say, hey, I'm ready to sign it, then you can send it to them electronically so they can sign it that way. Don't get too much in the weeds on whether it's done electronically or in person. If you got the opportunity to get it signed, okay? All right, just yell out if you guys have any questions.
Actually,
Okay.
I do. Just really quickly, if you weren't using DocuSign and you just wanted to print off this form with the Keller Williams logo, I couldn't figure out how to get to that. Like, I know how to get to it.
You should be able to, there's an icon that says download, right? And that saves it as a PDF.
So you still go through, like, create the opportunity and all that, go through DocuSign, you just do a download?
Yeah, or right now you could go into, like, I think all the forms are in FMLS as well.
But they don't have our logo on it, right?
They should.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to.
Well, do they? I don't know. I've never actually gone into FMLS.
I've actually found it through GAR, but it didn't have, like, it has the Georgia Realtors thing, but it doesn't have the Keller Williams logo.
Oh, so just go through DocuSign then. You can create a dummy opportunity.
Okay.
And have it be like you as the client's name or something.
Gotcha.
And then house like a bunch of the basic forms. So if you ever need to go in and print them off of that or save them off of that, you can do that.
Okay.
All right, cool. So at the very beginning, we're going to input the purchaser's name. Remember, if it's a husband and wife, put the husband and wife, or husband and husband, or wife and wife, whatever it is. The broker, that's where you would put Keller Williams Realty Consultants. Okay, your name will go further back in the contract, and then you put the date. The term of this agreement, I would generally have, it kind of depends on when their goal to purchase is. So if we're starting to work together now and they want to purchase before the end of the year, then I'll put 6 months. If they want to purchase, in the next 30 days, then I'll put 90 days. So I want, whatever the time limit is, I want it to be that plus some. Okay. I would say minimum you're looking at 90 to 120 days. I don't want like a week-long commitment from somebody, because the second they say, hey, you're my guy, I'm going way out of my way to help you. You're going to get me pretty intensely. Okay. Make sense? Okay. We are independent contractors of our broker, not an employee of the broker. Okay. Section number 4, which agency agreements or what types of agency are not offered by the broker? To be perfectly honest, we are a little fuzzy on dual agency. Dual agency is when you represent both the buyer and the seller in a transaction at the same time as clients. Okay. The state of Georgia does allow us to do that. And Melba and Andy and Aubrey and myself, we would allow you to do that, but on a case-by-case situation. And the way that we determine if we're going to grant that ability is if you can basically explain what that even means, right? So how would you handle certain situations? How would you explain this? What are your restrictions when speaking to the other party, right? So if you can be, and if you can actually pull off being a dual agent, then most likely you'll be granted the ability to do so. Okay, so technically you wouldn't check anything there. Okay. Commission, section 5A. Commissions are negotiable, as we all know. More often than not, you see a total of 6%, and generally half of that is split between the person who brings the seller and the person who brings the buyer. Okay. Section B, where it says, in the event seller does not pay the broker the full commission, buyer shall or shall not pay the difference at closing. I have always checked shall not. I don't want to be put in a situation where like I'm going to my client and saying, hey, they're paying 2.5% and I need you to pay the other 0.5%. I'm just going to show them what they want to see and I'll get paid whatever I get paid. I don't know if everyone agrees with that. You're free to check the other box if you want. I just never wanted to make a big deal about that. Okay. If the market turns a little bit and we start to see some foreclosures and short sales at a higher rate than we're seeing them today, you'll start to see some reduced commissions. So most short sales would pay a total of 5%, 2.5 and 2.5. And I'd say maybe 25% of foreclosures would pay a little less than 3% too. Okay, so if our market starts to get a little bit higher numbers of those, then you may want to go back and work your model to show that you're not going to get paid 3% on each deal on average. Okay, that way you don't do all the work you needed to do to hit your goals and you end up short financially. Make sense? Okay, section 6. Section 6, I would generally just do NA. If I know they're buying and they don't buy and they end up leasing, like I'll deal with that later. I'm trying to make this as frictionless as possible. Okay. Protected period. This is the length of the protected period shall be. I usually put about 90 days there. That basically means that if you show a buyer a property, then they fire you and go buy the property with somebody else, and they do it within the protected period, then you could have a claim on that commission. I'm working on attracting somebody to Keller Williams that has a broker that doesn't really care about them, and this woman has like a real strong case to get paid, but her broker doesn't want to chase it down. Okay, so consider yourself lucky that you're with us. I would normally put about 90 to 120 days there. Okay. Okay, next. The next 2 or 3 pages basically goes into detail on what all of those things, basically explaining all of that stuff. Okay, so again, you need to make sure that you are reading those, and any questions that you have, you're bringing up to us so that we can give you the confidence you need to go out and present this stuff properly. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, cool. Section 19. This is basically where you give the buyer a bunch of pamphlets and notices and these kind of things so that they know stuff like protect yourself when buying a home, the ABCs of agency. If what they're asking for might include properties that were built prior to 1978, I would send them the lead-based paint pamphlet. I would check the following: ABCs of agency, lead-based paint if applicable, the mold pamphlet, the EPA Home Buyers and Sellers Guide to Radon pamphlet, even though it will scare the crap out of them. Protect yourself when buying a home. Okay, if they are likely going to be buying a home in a community with a homeowners association, go ahead and send them that too. If they are going to buy a home that is in a condominium complex, send them that. If not, don't worry about it. So if somebody says, hey, I want a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home in a swim and tennis community, well, clearly it's not a condominium, so you don't have to send them the condominium sheet. If they're buying something new or a home that's going to be constructed, please send them the protect yourself when buying a home to be constructed. Regardless of whether they ultimately settle on a home in a floodplain or not, I would send them that. If they're buying a short sale or a distressed property, or like a foreclosure, you'd send them that. And retainer fee, I never took a retainer fee. So you don't have to check that. So meanwhile, you should go in and check, and like you said, Ashley, maybe create a dummy file within DocuSign and save all of these documents as PDFs and maybe put them into Google Drive or something like that. So when you work with a buyer, you can very quickly just pull over those PDFs and send them in an email. Hey, it was so nice to meet you today and talk about your goal to, to buy that home in Roswell and get your kids into that school district. I'm so excited to chat with you. Please see all the following attachments. They don't need to be signed, by the way. You just need to be able to prove that you shared them. And then when they autograph this particular contract, they will acknowledge that they've received them. Make sense? All right, special stipulations. This is where when we went in, and hang on, I will show you this really fast, which is special stip examples. Okay, so there was a couple in here. So all of these are purchase and sales stipulations, okay? And then there was a little section down below. Oh wait, can you not see this?
We can only see the special stip little page, not anything underneath them.
All right, okay, here we go. So the special stip examples. See this right here, buyer stipulations for buyer brokerage agreement. So these are from the Peters Company, right? So obviously you wouldn't put the Peters Company, but you'd say, Ashley Goodrich, working as an agent for the selling broker is the buyer's agent, encourages all buyers to have a general radon sewer scope or septic inspection, pool inspection if applicable, and termite inspections on all properties. Encourages all buyers to obtain a survey, encourages all buyers to obtain enhanced title insurance for all properties, and does not control the lending environment and cannot take responsibility for any delays associated with a particular lender. I have never put this kind of stuff in the buyer brokerage agreement, but I think it's a great idea. Okay, that way there's no doubt that you have formally recommended to them that they get a survey, or that you have formally recommended to them. I might even include something in here about getting a home warranty, right? Well, you didn't tell me to get a home warranty on the house and the AC broke the next day. Excuse me, here's a copy of the PDF and look at what it says there. Next time you'll read your contracts, right? Okay, let's go back. All right, back to the sales contract. So that's where you would put in the special stipulations. If you write in additional stipulations, then you would check that little box right there. If there are no additional stipulations, where most likely there wouldn't be, that's quite a bit of space, then you would just leave that blank. Okay, here is my opinion on the signature page. Okay, this document is just between you and you as the agent, you as the buyer's agent, and the purchasers. Okay, so I would encourage you to have full contact information here, right? So buyer's address, buyer's cell phone number, buyer's email address, the other spouse's email address, and all that, right? And then you need to completely fill out this section here with all the broker codes and all that kind of stuff. If you don't know what the broker codes are, they're in the newsletter that's sent out every single day, as well as the little plastic card Lucy gave you when you came on board. And if you still can't find it, you can just message us and we'll get you the answer right away. Okay. We'll get to this most likely with another contract today, but any contract that is going to be sent to the other party, remember this is just internal, and you and the buyer keep it for your own records. Any contract that's going to be sent to the other party, I wouldn't have any contact information of your client on there. I don't want them to know where the address is, where they live. I mean, clearly if it's their home, they know, but from a buyer perspective, no addresses, no email addresses, no cell phone numbers. I don't want them talking to my person without me being involved. That's why I'm involved, right? So if they have a question about the buyer or the seller, they're going to come to me. They're not going directly to the other agent. I'm sorry, they're not going to my client directly, because my client's not been trained in formal negotiation. My client doesn't know what to say and what not to say. And my client, most likely, because they're proud of their home, will talk about it more than they should. Does that make sense? That, by the way, is the same reason why your client should not be at the inspection. Get that seller out of that house. Make sense? I was once at a
Bill, have a question for you.
Yeah.
If these documents are on DocuSign, would you not, because this is one of the forms you don't have to make shareable with the other agent, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Now, I'll tell you what I always did, and I haven't played around with DocuSign too much, to be honest. That's mostly managed by Pam and by Luth, but anything that was fully executed, I would download and I would put in an external file. So like, for example, I had a Google Drive file for every buyer and every seller. And as we built up their collection of documents, like when they signed the purchase and sale, for example, and it was fully executed, I'd download that. I'd keep it in the loop, of course, or the envelope, but then I'd take it out and I'd put it in a Google Drive doc so it was backed up outside. And then every week or two, we would transfer all that into an external hard drive. You probably don't need to do that so much, but I did it anyway. Okay, does that make sense?
Okay.
So who did you say should not be at the inspection?
I believe that the seller, if you're representing the seller should not be at the inspection.
Oh, okay.
Okay. There's no reason for the seller to be there because they're coming out from behind the veil, if you will. The veil is the real estate agent. The client should be back here. If they show up at the home inspection, they're putting themselves in a vulnerable position. Okay. Quite frankly, there's a lot of people that say the agent shouldn't even be at the home inspection. The buyer's agent shouldn't even be at the home inspection, right? Because they may be, they may make something not as big of a deal that it could be or should be or something like that, right? So this was my attitude towards home inspections. Again, not saying I've got the only right answer, but this is how I addressed it. Schedule the home inspection for, let's say, 2 o'clock on a Thursday. Okay. I would call my home inspector and say, hey, it's a 2,600 square foot home on a basement and it's got a blah, blah, blah. And I say, how long do you think that's going to take? Right. And he'd say 3 hours. So I said, okay, buyer, I want you to meet me at the property at this time, which was 3 hours after it started, or 2 hours and 45 minutes after it started. What I wanted to do, that's doing a couple things. Number one is it's getting the buyer out of the hair of the inspector. Okay, I want the inspector to focus on what the man or the woman is hired to do. Okay, if the guy has to like explain every single little thing that he finds or she finds during the process, number one, it'll take forever, and number two, the guy or woman can't focus. So I want them to be able to focus. Then at the end, I would arrange what I called a walkthrough. Okay, so I had an inspector that I worked with a lot, and he'd walk us through the home. So he'd have his little phone with the report, because you do most of it on a tablet or whatever, and he'd say, okay, well, this is you know, here's the deal with this sink in the basement. It's dripping a little bit. Or here, let me show you where the wood rot is in the corner board. Or hey, this is the garbage disposal that doesn't operate properly. Or here's where I think there might be termites. Are you having a termite inspection, right? He'd walk us through the property. Now, remember, I didn't want to be blindsided by anything. So I'd have a relationship with my client, or I'm sorry, my home inspector, to say if there's anything that's like big problem, I want to know before I show up in my buyer standing right there. Not that I'm going to hide anything from them, but I just want to be mentally prepared to deal with that, right? Make sense?
Sure.
Now, just about everything can be fixed with money. The question is how much money is it going to be and whose money is it going to be? Okay, so remember, we're the calming force in the transaction. If we make a big deal about a backward electrical outlet, the buyer will leave the deal. That's ridiculous. An electrician can fix a backward electrical outlet in like literally 5 minutes for like $50. We need to move on. Okay. That also comes in when you're setting the expectations during the buyer consultation to say, look, when we ask for repairs to be made, we're going to ask for the big things that are generally speaking health and safety related. Okay. We're not going to be able to cut and paste the entire inspection report summary and send it to the seller and expect them to fix it all. Okay, we're going to pinpoint the things that are the most expensive or the most concerning, and we're going to ask for those to be addressed. But please don't come back and want this place to be completely rebuilt. Okay, it's a 55-year-old home. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, by the way, the seller is under no obligation to, quote, fix any type of code violations or something like that. They don't have to, quote, bring the home to code. Everything is negotiable, okay? Now, so what I would do is I'd have that little walkthrough at the end so I could see everything with my own eyes and the buyer could see everything with their own eyes. Then I would ask something to the effect of, you know, what do you think about the house, or would you buy this home for your daughter, or something like that, where the inspector was kind of giving it his seal of approval, if you will. Right, it's not fallen down. I also have had a home inspector that called me, and 15 minutes into the home inspection, he called me and says, hey man, this home's got major foundational issues, right? So I sent it quickly, the picture of it, to my structural engineer. The structural engineer looked at the picture, he says, that's a big problem. I called my buyer says, send him home, right? So the guy got like $50 because he was only there for like 20 minutes, and then we moved on. You see what I'm saying? So we want to have that dialogue. We want to have that relationship with our home inspector where we're giving the person obviously honest information, but we're updating everyone along the way in case something needs to be addressed quickly, right? If anything, if you think about it, it makes more sense for the home inspector to kill the deal so he'd get another deal. Right, so the motivations are not in line with, hey, this guy's just going to give it its stamp of approval to move the process forward. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any questions on the buyer brokerage agreement?
If they want to cancel, you said what's the process if they decide they want to cancel?
Okay, so that's going to go into the purchase and sale. So should we do the purchase and sale agreement next?
No, but I mean, if they want to cancel, like working with you and start working with someone.
Oh, I'm sorry. So cancel this agreement, not the sales contract.
Right.
So they just put in writing that they want to terminate the agreement.
And they send it to that agent.
Yep.
Like they can email it?
Yep.
Okay.
And then the contract talks about whether it's unilateral or whether it's mutual. So if it's unilateral, then there are some protections. Like, for example, if they want to fire you, but you don't want to be fired or something, then they have you have some protections. If you say, okay, we're just going to part ways, then basically you're not entitled to anything in the future.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so if that's the case, would you like to now do, what's the next contract that you'd like to review together? How about the listing agreement?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, sure. Anyone else want anything? Don't be too quiet today. Okay, seller listing agreement. Hang on one sec. Okay, let's pull this up. Okay, seller listing agreement. Okay, we've talked a little bit about legal descriptions, but I want to talk a little bit about that right now. Whenever you are beginning to court a seller and you believe that it's time to put together a listing agreement or get kind of your file organized, what I would recommend that you do is email Kern. Hang on, I'm gonna mute the offender. Hang on. Oh, maybe it's me. Okay. Send Kern an email. Kern is our attorney at O'Kelly and Sorahan, and say, I'd like the legal description for, and give the property address. Okay. The property address, the easiest way to, for her to get that information is you give her the full address, right? So street number, street name, city, state, and zip. And if you can give her the seller's name or the owner's name and the county that that property is in, those three things will allow her to pull the report as quickly as possible. Okay, name, obviously address, and seller's name or owner's name, address, and the county that the property is in. Okay, this section down here, 1B, where it asks about legal description, I just always like to attach it as an exhibit. That way there was no chance that I would record a number wrong or forget a space or something like that. Okay, and so I would always click here, attached as an exhibit, and then, for example, in the purchase and sale, on that second to last page, you would put, legal description as exhibit A or whatever. And then on that actual document, you'd write in a little text block that said exhibit A. Make sense? Okay, so at the beginning here, you type in the address, the county, the zip code, etc. Listing period. I believe that the listing period is going to be based on what a typical listing period for a property like that would be. So for example, if it's just your regular kind of run-of-the-mill, let's say, well, let me rephrase that, I shouldn't say it that way. If it's just kind of a standard home, let's say that's about $500,000 and below, I think you should probably be somewhere in that 120 days. I would suggest 90 days as the least minimum, 90-day commitment, because the second that place goes on the market, I'm going to work with phone calls and print collateral and Facebook ads and all this stuff. I don't want the guy to back out on me. If, for example, it is priced above $500,000, and every market is different, but then you start to get into more of a buyer's market, especially if you're up in the close to $1 million or a bit beyond $1 million, right? Those homes don't generally sell in 30 days on average. Those homes could take a good bit longer. So if the average days on the market for the property like the one you have is 400 days, let's say you get some $7 million ranch in Milton or something like that, I don't want a 90-day agreement on that. I probably want a 2-year agreement on that. Does that make sense? So make sure you're doing your homework to see, is there anything unique about this type of listing that I should get a longer agreement? Does that make everyone follow that? Okay. Broker's duty to obtain the list price. Again, the list price, if you heard me this morning, I generally would have this signed. There's kind of two, I might even have it signed TBD or something, to be determined. right? Because number one, the second they're willing to commit to me, I want them signed. That's the first piece. However, the price could change at the last minute. I think I told you guys this story this morning where about 6 or so weeks ago, I had a client call me and say, hey, I'm ready to rent my place again. And I said, okay, let's talk through the numbers. And the numbers did not support him renting that place. It supported him selling that place. Okay, so ultimately we decided to sell it. He asked the question, so what do you think it's worth? And we looked at the data together and I said, you're probably somewhere around 180, maybe a hair more. Okay, so I look at the data a couple days after that, just with a set of fresh eyes. And I said, actually, I think you can probably go to 200. Okay, that was about a month ago. And Pam just listed the home the other day, Thursday or Friday. And right before, she sends me a message and says, hey, I think we can go to 215. Here, look at these and tell me what you think, right? So there may be homes that come onto the market that cause you to reevaluate your listing price strategy. It might go up, it might go down, but don't be married to some number from a month ago when you guys first started courting each other, when now there's a new listing that makes that not such a great strategy. Does everyone follow that? Okay, so you got to find that delicate balance between waiting towards the end to set a price and getting the agreement signed when you can. Make sense? All right, negotiation. So number 3 should be the list price. That is the list price that you put in there. Let's just make one more note on the list price. Many of us know that, and this is just my opinion, you might get different opinions from other people, I'm sure you would, but we all know that the vast majority of people are looking online first for their properties, right? And so let's just say, for example, we pick a list price of $299.9 or something, okay? If people are looking at 300 and below, they will see that home. If they're looking at 300 and above, they will not see that home. Okay, so on the major brackets, I recommend being on the number. So like 325 as opposed to 324.9. Okay, now if it's somewhere in between, like this property, we knew it was more than 200, but we knew it was less than 225. So the idea of trying to be on the bracket wasn't that big of a deal. So we could have gone in and be like 214.9. We decided to be at 215 even. I've never been a fan of the 9 crap. We're not selling t-shirts here, right? This is that makes it look like a bargain in my opinion. Does that make sense? I'm sure there's people on this call and that might watch this later that disagree with me. You're free to disagree with me. Okay, that was just my strategy. If you can get close to the number, if you're close to a bracket, my recommendation is to be on that number, right? So don't be 249.9, be 250. That's just my take.
What are the brackets? Like
I'd say every $25,000.
Okay.
Right. Once you get up into like the 5s and 6s, you're probably more like 6, 650, 7, 750, like that. But if you're down in like the 1s and 2s and stuff, you're probably every 25 grand. Okay. Okay. Next, marketing. This property would be in the following multiple listing services. That is Georgia MLS, Georgia Multiple Listing Service, and FMLS, First Multiple Listing Service. And I also put it in Keller Williams Listing Service, KWLS. Okay. That's not where you would put like Zillow and Realtor.com and Homes.com and all that. Once the home goes into those MLSs, it gets distributed to the thousands of home buyer websites. Okay. All right, next, section 6. As we know, commission is negotiable. More often than not, you see 6% and split with 3 and 3. I've always been a proponent of giving the other side half of the earnings. I have seen, let's say you get 6% and they get 3.5 to the listing agent and 2.5 to the buyer's agent. I never was a big fan of that, right? And you'll see it on the closing statement, how much the other party got. It just doesn't sit well when you try to take more than you're supposed to get. Does that make sense? So play fair. Okay, protected period. Again, I would normally put about 90 days there. 90 days. Okay, independent contractor relationship, again, check independent contractor. Agency, we talked about a second ago, you can leave that, all of those blank. If you are ever in a situation where you have the listing and an unrepresented buyer comes, you basically have 3 choices. The first choice would be, hang on. The first choice would be you refer the buyer to another agent. Okay, and in that situation, you would refer that, generally speaking, for about 25%. The second option is you try to do dual agency. So you would receive both commissions, but you need to get approval from Aubrey to do that. And more than likely what he's going to do is make sure that you know how to be a dual agent before he grants you that ability. Understand? Let's see. Oh, and if you have a team, for example, like you can have a teammate, like let's say I had the listing and I gave the buyer to Pam or something like that. Okay, so that would be designated agency. The 2 agents have the same broker. Okay. While we're on that, does everyone know the difference between dual agency and designated agency? Okay, dual agency is when you have the same agent representing as a client both the buyer and the seller in the transaction simultaneously. Okay. The state of Georgia does allow that. Again, you got to get permission from the broker. Okay. Secondly, another way that sometimes you see it, oh, and obviously it needs to be disclosed. Okay. There's also something called disclosed designated agency. That is basically when the one agent has the listing. Let's say I have a listing and then Ashley brings the buyer. Okay, Ashley's working with the buyer as an agent, as her buyer's agent, or that person's buyer's agent, and I'm representing the seller as a client. Okay, we have the same broker, which means the broker, the way the state really thinks about that is it says the broker is assigning or designating me to work with the seller and Ashley to work with the buyer. Okay, again, that has to be disclosed, but it is certainly allowed. Okay, and just because we know each other and we see each other all the time doesn't mean we should allow our client to be any less represented. Make sense? All right, so keep your cards tight. So that's dual agency and designated agency. By the way, it is not designated agency if you're working with an agent from, let's say, Chat North or North Atlanta or the KW Bucket office or the KW Smyrna office or something like that. Strictly our Roswell office. 2 agents in the Roswell office, that would be designated agency. If it's 2 agents that are part of 2 different companies or 2 different offices, it's just normal. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, special circumstances, number 10. This is where you would note if there is any type of bankruptcy or divorce or short sale or anything that is unusual going on, right? If there's a, let's say an executor of an estate or something of that nature. That way you know who the point people are and it's disclosed to both the seller and their agent. Okay, again, this is a document that is not shareable. Let me rephrase that. Of course it's shareable, but it should not be shared. Make sense? Everyone with me? Everyone on mute?
Yes.
All right, just making sure everyone's alive out there.
Yeah, we're alive.
We're with you.
All right, so that's where that information should go. The next couple pages are explanations of all the stuff we just reviewed. And then you will get to this similar section that we saw in the buyer's agreement, which is all of the sharing of the document stuff, right? So that's the ABCs of agency, the lead-based paint pamphlet, the mold, the seller's guide to radon, protect yourself when selling a home, and only if it's applicable, the short sale and foreclosure. Everyone know what a short sale is, by the way? Anybody not know what a short sale is? I'll tell you. You don't have to raise your hand.
Selling.
Let's say,
And
for
more-
example, I own a property and the fair market value of the property is 300,000. Okay, and let's say that I purchased it at a time when the market was stronger and the values were higher. And let's just say, for example, I purchased it for 350 and I have a loan of 325 on it, and now the place is debatably worth 300. Okay, so I have a problem. Because if I want to sell the home, I owe more than the home is worth. Okay, so if the buyer comes and says, "Hey, I want to buy your home. I believe it's worth 300. Here's an offer for 300." In order for me to get out of that deal or to fully, do my part of that deal, I have to not only sell the home, but I also have to pay off the mortgage. So I have to either get the money, enough money from the buyer to pay off the mortgage, or I got to come to the table with the difference. So if the buyer gives me 300 and I have 25 grand in cash, then I can make the lender whole and we can move on and everything is dandy. But if I'm not in that type of financial situation, and a lot of times foreclosure or short sales is kind of like almost a pre-foreclosure, right? There's usually maybe a health issue or a financial issue or a job issue or something like that that's causing financial stress for the owner. And they don't have that kind of money, right? And therefore, they've got to take that offer and basically say, all right, lender, the market says this place is worth 3. I know I owe you 325, but I'm broke and I'm in financial distress, and you already know because I missed last month's payment. Here's somebody that's willing to prevent you from having to take it from me, which is going to be a whole nother round of expensive and time-consuming stuff. So I want you to sell the home. I want you to allow me to sell the home short of the mortgage. That's the idea, meaning that the bank, instead of receiving 325, will agree to take 300 for it. Make sense? Generally speaking, that is a sign of some form of stress or distress. Okay, not always, but here's a decent rule of thumb. If somebody is in a financial pinch, I'm just going to go out on a limb and saying, servicing the HVAC system every 6 months probably didn't make it to the top of the priority list, right? And maintaining all the landscaping the way it should have been maintained, or changing the air filters. It's just oftentimes a sign that there's probably more investigation that has to get done. Doesn't mean the house is falling apart or anything like that. It just means that the seller has been in a financial pinch, and as a result, there's certain things around the house that probably didn't get done. Everyone with me on that?
Yes.
Okay, same thing here. We're going to include the legal description. So again, as I mentioned before, and here's where you would call it whatever exhibit it would be. Lead-based paint disclosure or lead-based paint exhibit needs to be filled out. I tended to fill it out no matter what, but absolutely needs to be filled out if the home was built prior to 1978. 1978 is when the government stopped required paint not to be made with lead. Okay, and basically ingesting paint that has been made with lead has been determined to cause all kinds of problems, right? More often than not, you see that on like windowsills and stuff like that. All right, if there's any special stipulations, then you would put them there. If there's need for attached additional special stipulations, you check that lowest box. Everyone with me? All right, and then because this is similar to the buyer brokerage agreement, where it's an internal document between you and the prospect, or you and the soon-to-be client, so you should have full contact information here. Okay. Again, on the purchase of sale or any other documents, the seller's contact information or the buyer's contact information is none of the other party's business. Okay. Just a little caveat. We are in a world of video and sound recording and all this kind of stuff. So I read the other day that 95% of properties right now have some form of recording system in the home. So when you are in a home showing a buyer, that is not the place to discuss whether you love the home or would buy this home no matter what, or I don't care about this price, or I'll pay list price, or blah, blah, blah. No strategy talk in the house. Got it? They're listening. Okay? No snooping around the house. They're watching. Okay? We've not we as in our office or anything, but there's been issues with people going in and out of medicine drawers looking for pain pills, and people snooping through magazine piles and grabbing stuff out of the refrigerator. I mean, I've heard it all. Okay, so please behave when you're in somebody else's home. Okay, do not talk strategy when you're in somebody else's home. They're watching you. Got it?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on this page? Once it's signed by the seller, receipt of a copy of this agreement is hereby acknowledged by the seller. So they would fill on the date and time and all that, and that would be your final record. Again, I would always, once it's executed, download a copy and put it in an external file. That was just that's just what I did. Okay. All right. Thoughts or questions?
Bill, I have a question for you on this listing agreement. What if if a seller says, okay, the property is sold as is? Can that go into special steps even though we're going to disclose it to, a potential buyer, the agents, that the property is sold as is?
If they want to put it in the listing agreement, they could. I mean, I'm going to talk them out of it anyway. But if that makes them feel comfortable, they could do that. And basically, what they're saying is like they're essentially trying to play hardball. But at the end of the day, if my buyer wants a little plumbing thing fixed for a couple $100, and he's going to walk away from the deal if you don't do it for him, are you telling me you're not going to fix that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I just kind of let them have their way at the beginning, and then we'll determine if they're real about that later on.
Right. Okay.
Makes sense. One other thing, like an example of a special stipulation for a seller may be something to the effect of, let's say we're going to list this property for sale under these terms and for rent under these terms simultaneously. And if we ultimately find a renter, then I would be paid that commission and not this commission. It would just be, or it'd be something like, let's say I suggested that the price was $325 and they wanted to start at $335 and it was against my wishes. And I said, okay, well, after 10 days, if we don't have any showings, then we're going to automatically reduce the price. That's where you'd put something in there, predetermined price reductions. Remember, that's not particularly, I mean, it's advisable if that's all you can get. But remember, the second that home hits the market and it goes out to all the, instant notification apps and all these kind of things, that's where the activity and the energy around that listing is the highest. And what you don't want to do is for basically these buyers who study the data all day long, they see the home come in that really should be $325, comes in at $350, and then 3 weeks later it's down at $325. They're like, what's wrong with the home? It's been on the market for 3 weeks. When in reality, the only thing wrong with the home was the price. Make sense? Okay. Now, also, just as another caveat, remember, the best indication that you can have about fair market value of a property is how the market has reacted to it, right? So I've got a home, let's say I've got a property on the market for $350 and it's been on the market for 6 weeks. Guess what? There's 8 billion people in the world, and none of them are willing to pay $350 for your place. None of them. So that ain't the right price. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the home. Doesn't mean it's not pretty. Doesn't mean it wasn't well kept. It just means it's not worth $350. Okay. There's, like we talk about in Bold sometimes, marketing doesn't solve all the problems. Price solves all the problems. So what's gas right now? 170 or so? Is that right? 169, 179? Is that right?
195, I think.
195. Okay, so let's just say, for example, I owned a gas station and I was going to market gas right now for $2.99. How much gas do you think I'd sell? Come on.
Not much.
Not a lot. Not a lot.
Not a lot. Now, what happens if I took out front page ads and radio ads and Super Bowl ads and all these fired fireworks off the ceiling, and that's probably not a good idea. Balloons and all this kind of stuff, and told the world, hey, I'm right here, I'm selling gas for $2.99. Do you think that would help?
No.
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 It would basically just tell more people that I'm crazy and that my price is wrong. And so every once in a while, you have to bring a seller back to these conversations when you're dealing with pricing or price reducing to say, hey, look, the property is on literally thousands of websites. Here's the problem, though, is that when comparing it to other available options, they're not choosing you. Okay, and so it's not that there's it's not that there's anything wrong with your home, it's that the price is not correct. And the second you get the price right, then we're in business. It's like, and here's another good example. Let's say you have a brand new iPad, still in the packaging, brand new. And let's just say, for example, this model is worth $1,000. That's the fair market value for it, right? If I try to sell that thing for $1,100, ain't nobody buying it. And they can say all they want that it's brand new and in the packaging, it's still not worth it. But if I offer it for $900, I'm gonna have a line out the door, right?
All right.
That's the market at work. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What doc is next? How about the purchase and sale?
Okay.
All right. Okay, hang on one moment. Is this helpful, guys, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to include some
It is.
some jokes here and there, some personal stories, that kind of thing. Okay, let's go back and share the screen. All right, purchase and sale. Here's the purchase and sale. Okay. Let's actually back up and talk about one other concept first. When you're working with a buyer, let's talk about what constitutes an offer. Okay, what documents are required in order for it to be a quote, complete offer, if you will. Okay, so try to jot this down if you would. I'm working as a buyer's agent. I've got the buyer to commit to being an exclusive relationship, right? So I've sent them all of those list of disclosures and protect yourself when doing this and this and this and the full disclosure and all that. That's already been sent to them. They've executed the buyer brokerage agreement. Now, in order for them to submit an offer, here's what an offer should include, okay? An offer should include a pre-approval letter, okay? It should include a purchase and sale agreement. It should include whatever financing contingency or loan exhibit is necessary. So that would be a VA loan exhibit, an FHA loan exhibit, or a conventional loan exhibit. Should be one of those three. Or if it's cash, it should be a all cash exhibit. Okay, so you're gonna have the pre-approval letter. If it's cash, you'll need something called proof of funds, which is essentially like an investment account statement or a bank statement saying, hey, this person has 300 grand in the bank. You can cross out the account number and the buyer's address and all that. Just, they don't need to know the guy's social security number and stuff, but they just want to see that the appropriate amount of money is there. Okay, so pre-approval letter, purchase and sale, one of those four documents, FHA, I guess it could be like the, what's the loan, when you buy, like in the rural, can't even say that word, royal, somebody say that? R-U-R-A-L. I can't say it.
USDA?
Yeah.
Rural.
Well, there's VA, there's rural.
Is that for USDA loans?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Exactly.
Rural.
That's if a property is
for rural areas.
outside of major city areas, right? And there's maps for where the property would be located, and that qualifies you for certain financing options, right? So whatever type of financing it is, VA, FHA, USDA, all cash, or conventional, okay? And then copies of any disclosure statements. So community association disclosure if it's part of an HOA, and seller's property disclosure or seller's condo property disclosure if it's a condo, okay? That is oh, and a copy of the earnest money. Okay. Sometimes you might not have the earnest money at that time. If you do, go ahead and send them a copy of the earnest money that basically says you're holding it. Is there anything else? Am I missing anything? Okay. That is what constitutes an offer, and likely the legal description as well, right? Because you've asked Kern for it and you've pulled it off and you've uploaded it for signatures as well. Okay. That is what an offer is.
Bill, what do you mean by copy of the earnest money? Is that like a cashier's check, or what do you mean by that?
So again, it depends on when you get it, but there's a box in the, see how box 7 here, right there? It says that the earnest money is A, as of offer date. That implies that I'm in receipt of it. So let's say, Donna, you wrote an offer, you're my buyer. We're buying a $200,000 home. You've given me a $2,000 check for earnest money and I'm holding it, right? You've given it to me. It's been delivered as of the offer date. If that's the case, then I should send the seller basically proof that I'm in receipt of it, which is essentially just like, let's say you take a picture of it or scan it in and turn it into a PDF, and it just basically says like, you know, here's the check and it was received on such and such a day, right?
Okay.
I would typically check B there, 7B, which says that, let's say it's $2,000 within 3 days. So I didn't necessarily have to be in receipt of the earnest money check if we haven't formally come to terms. Does that make sense? But like if I was working with an out-of-town person and they've already picked the home and gone back home, then I wanted to have them leave me with a check, right? Because oftentimes that's going to be delivered within 2 or 3 days. It's not fast enough for them to put it in the mail when they get home and then have it, you know, in the office by the appropriate day. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So let's go back up to the top. We're putting in the property address, county, etc. Same thing with 1B, legal description. Again, my preference was always to ask for it. The legal description, by the way, is the way that the county, it's basically the reference point for the county, right? How they label it, if you will, right? How they would identify where it's at. Okay, section 2, purchase price. That's obviously where the offer price goes. Okay, so let's talk about this from a 30,000-foot view. Okay, you are presenting what is essentially your buyer's perfect case scenario when you're submitting an offer. That does not mean that you're going to try to buy a $300,000 house for $250,000, because that doesn't make any sense. Okay, you need to be respectful and you need to be within reason of the data, but it doesn't mean that you need to give them full price and all these kind of things. It's your first offer. Okay, what I generally try to do is I wanted it to be a hair higher than what would piss them off, but be excited for them to have an offer in their hand. Now, if it's a multiple offer situations, oftentimes you don't have the luxury of that. Make sense? You need to be more aggressive. Okay. 1 second. Okay. Let's talk about closing costs for a second. Okay. Now, I'm pretty particular about this. Remember, in a real estate transaction, there's 2 sides and each has closing costs. Okay. Let's talk about seller closing costs first. Seller closing costs are, generally speaking, largely based on the commissions. So you're probably, let's just say it's 6% of the sales price. The seller is going to pay both sides of that, right? The 3 to one side and the 3 to the other side. That is by far and away the lion's share of the seller's closing cost. The only other closing cost that the seller is generally responsible for is a wire fee to pay off their mortgage and the recording fee to record that the mortgage is no longer in existence, that it's been paid off. Okay, those fees are generally less than $100 or so. The only other thing that the seller is going to need to potentially prepare for is any prorations. So let's talk about prorations for a second. Prorations would be HOA fees largely HOA fees and taxes. So what that means is that, let's say in full the taxes are due I forget if it's mid-November or mid-October. Okay, so let's say that the seller is selling the home and it's going to close in May. Okay, so for 5 months out of the 12 months, the seller owned the home. But when the tax bill comes, the buyer or the new owner is going to be the one that pays the entire tax bill. So in order to offset that amount, right, in order for the seller to settle up with the buyer for the amount of time that they actually owned the home and were living there, they're going to need to pay the seller roughly 5/12 of the full tax bill. Okay. However, they have been giving that money in 1/12 increments to their mortgage holder, right? And they're not going to be able to access those funds in order to settle up at the closing. So they're going to have to come out of pocket for that. Now, it can be used from their proceeds or whatever, but they're going to have to come out of pocket for that, right? Does everyone follow what I mean by that? Okay, so they will pay for the exact number of days for taxes and for HOA fees. And they'll do a day-by-day proration at the closing table. And then if you hold the mortgage and you're required to have escrows, generally speaking, then you'll get your escrow money back generally within 30 days. Sometimes it happens very quickly. And I think by law, they have to refund it to you within 30 days. Okay, but you can't use those funds at closing. So for example, I just sold a home that my wife and I own that we had been, doing the monthly prorations. I owed about roughly $3,000 in taxes that I had to bring to the table, right? And then within 30 days, I got essentially that same money back, plus a couple of months of cushion. I couldn't use the escrow account to settle up, but I had to settle up ahead of time. Does everyone follow what I mean by that?
Yeah.
All right, beautiful. Tell me if I'm going too basic here.
So does that mean you have to bring a check to closing for that amount, or does that come out of the proceeds?
It can come out of the proceeds, but if you're short, then you need to bring a check. Well, really, you need to wire funds in. Nobody takes checks anymore. Okay. All right. Buyer's closing cost. Now, the contract basically says that the buyer is responsible for all of the fees associated with buying the home and all of the fees associated with getting financing to buy the home. Then the next sentence basically says, and the seller will contribute X number of dollars to closing costs. Closing costs are, generally speaking, in the neighborhood of around 2 to 3% of the loan amount. Okay, that can vary in a lot of different directions. Okay, so the best rule of thumb is to have that relationship with the lender so that you can get what's called a loan worksheet or a closing cost estimate or prepaid estimate, so that you know, and most importantly, your buyer knows what are the expected and estimated closing costs that the buyer is going to face. Because if the buyer's closing costs are, let's say, $9,000 and you only ask for $4,000 in your contract, well, the buyer's going to have to come up with the rest. And that is going to be a really nasty phone call if they're not prepared for that. Does that make sense?
Bill, how quick can lenders tell you this?
Lenders can pull that up pretty quickly, assuming that the buyer has given, the appropriate documentation to the lender, which they should have done to get a pre-approval anyway.
Okay.
But I always like to have that up front. So let's say you're going to be my buyer. I send you to Kathy. Kathy runs the numbers, gives me a loan worksheet and said, hey, this woman can afford $400,000 on a 10% conventional loan. Here's the worksheet for it. So if you buy a home or you want to put an offer on a home similarly priced with similar taxes, and I can go in there and edit that if need be, then I know that I'm offering an appropriate amount of closing costs. I'm not asking for more than I need, and I'm not asking for not enough. Make sense? No. What? Quickly. I heard about that. right, I'll come find you in a bit, okay?
Hi.
Here, looking
Hi.
back.
Hi.
Okay. Thank you. I'm teaching a bunch of people how to write sales contracts, okay?
Okay.
Okay, I need a little space. I've got a lot of guests.
Then give me a high
Okay. All right. See you in a bit. Okay. Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. So we have closing cost. There's two kind of closing costs. One is what the bank will call closing cost, or what the lender will call closing cost. That's basically everything that's associated with getting the loan. So that's the underwriting fee, title search fee, recording fees, attorney's fees, all that kind of stuff. Then there's something called estimated prepaids, right? So let's just take that example before. This guy buys the home in May. His first mortgage payment is going to be July 1st. And then, so he's going to pay a 1/12 of his estimated taxes, July 1st, August 1st, September 1st, October 1st. Then the bill's going to come. The bill's going to be for the full year. So if he's only paid 4 months of 1/12 payment, he's not going to have enough in the account in order to pay the full tax bill. Makes sense? So he had to put a certain amount of money, a certain number of months of money into the escrows to begin with, and a full years of insurance premium. So all the sum of that is also considered closing cost. So he or she's going to have to come up with that money too. So I want to make sure that my buyer understands those two numbers and how those numbers have come to be, so that I can ask for the appropriate number of dollars of closing costs. So let's look at one more thing. Let's say the closing costs are $10,000 and a $400,000 purchase. Okay, so $400,000 sales price, 10 grand in closing costs. Let's look at two options. First option is 400,000. Seller gets 400 and immediately pays 10 out to help the buyer with closing costs. They net 390. The other option is 390, no closing cost. To the seller, it's virtually the same. Okay, the commissions will be slightly different, but it's virtually the same. In both scenarios, they're going to walk with a net of 390, minus commissions and whatnot, right? For the buyer, it's a huge difference, because in one scenario, they don't have to come to the table with any closing costs. And in the other scenario, they got to come to the table with all the closing costs. Okay. In my personal opinion, I have some pretty strong financial beliefs. I think money is as cheap as you probably will ever find it. And if it was me, I would not bring closing costs to the table. I'd roll it into the mortgage, because money is so cheap to borrow right now. Okay. That also goes to speak to, let's say you are, you've got a 5% down payment, but you've got enough money to put 7% down. I would probably just put 5% down. It's not going to change PMI so much. I'd rather have the cash liquid. It's going to change for every $1,000 that you borrow, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of around $4 to $5 per month per 1,000. So let me put that into some numbers. Let's say the difference between borrowing 300,000 and 310,000 is probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of around $45 per month. Everyone follow that?
Say that again.
So for every $1,000 that you borrow, it's going to cost the borrower in the neighborhood of around let's call it $4.50 per month per 1,000. So the difference between borrowing, let's say 300 and 310,000 is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of around $45 per month.
Okay.
So at some point, like, let's say you're doing, you're in highest and best situation, right? And the buyer's trying to determine, well, how high are you willing to go? There's two main factors. One is, what is the place even worth, right? If it's worth 300, I don't want to spend 320 for it, but I want to win, right? So it's that delicate balance. But it's also saying, like, okay, so if you want to go to 302 just so you can win the home, it's only going to cost you an extra $10 a month or $9 a month. It's not going to kill you. But at some point, that extra $4 is going to be like, okay, I'm tapped out, right? I can no longer afford this, or I'm no longer comfortable affording this. The bank may tell me I could afford it, and they may be comfortable with me committing, I don't know, let's say $2,100 a month to buying this home, but I'm not comfortable with the way the math would work on that. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So all of that is to say you don't want to ask for more than you need, and you don't want to ask for less than you need. Make sense?
Sure.
Which assumes that you actually know what you need. So if you don't know what you need to have the conversation with the lender. Okay. By the way, if the lender gives you any back talk about that, you say, look, we're on the same team here. So in order for me to make sure that I ask for the appropriate number of closing costs, I'm going to need you to run the worksheets. They say, oh, I'll run the worksheets once you get a contract. Say, no, 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 no. We don't work like that. I want to see the breakdown, right? And I've always kind of had, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this, but I've kind of always had the mindset that I was going to go out there and kill this business, and everyone that wanted to be on my team would earn their right to be on my team. And everyone that didn't want to do things in a way that I wanted them to do it, they didn't get to hang out with me, right? So if you don't want to help me help our joint client in the way that I want to do it, like I want a worksheet now so I can see this. If you're going to give me a bunch of grief about that, we're not going to work together, right? I've probably told this story to you guys before, but I know there's at least a few new faces on the call. I believe that I want to always surround myself with A players, right? We have a lot of vendors in this business that can make the transaction super easy for us or make the transaction super hard for us. And I can remember one of my first transactions was a little condo in Decatur, and this was back when the market was terrible. And just goes to show you, we had negotiated a $45 maid bill, right? So a cleaning service would come out, and the buyer would have $45 of that maid bill paid, and everything else would be they would have to pay, or paid for by the seller, and anything else they'd have to pay for out of pocket, right? So I didn't have a maid, so I asked the other agent. I said, can you connect me with yours? So I meet the maid down there, meet the cleaning lady down there, and I said to her, I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. There's this weird sticky thing on top of the fridge, and then there's other weird sticky thing in one of the cabinets. That's really what my client is upset about. So I want you to clean that, then clean that, and I'm going to pay you $45. So as soon as you feel like you've earned $45, you can pack out, because that's all I got to pay you, right? So she cleaned the whole place top to bottom like I've never seen before. I mean, this was a rock star cleaning job. And we've been working together ever since. That was 15 years ago, okay? The same day I met a carpet cleaning guy. I was cocky back then. And I said, hey, you're going to be my guy until you screw up. Well, guess what? He screwed up that day, and we hadn't spoke since, right? So you should always be constantly building your group of preferred vendors, because the preferred vendors, not only can they support the growth of your business by connecting you with people that might want to buy or sell homes, right? Which every once in a while they should be held accountable to, since you're going to send them all these opportunities, right? But they also make the transaction so much easier. Like I could call a plumber and say, hey, we got a 50-gallon water heater that's gas, and blah, blah, blah. How much does it cost to replace that? And in 2 seconds, I can get a number, right? Or I send a picture of some wood rot to my handyman and say, how much is this going to cost? So rather than like bringing out a bunch of estimators and all this kind of stuff, these things just happen super fast. Make sense? All right, perfect.
Bill, I have a quick question about the closing costs issue. Have you said previously that if you offer the list price and then you also try to roll the closing costs into the mortgage, that you could run into an issue with the appraiser?
Possibly, yes. So you could run into an issue with the appraisal no matter what. However, let's go back to that example that I just stated about $310,000 in closing and $290 and no money in closing. In scenario A, the home has to appraise for $300 in order for the lender to approve it. In scenario B, the home only has to appraise for $290. So if I'm a seller, all other things exactly the same, I'd rather take the 290 deal, right? Because I have a lower burden for the appraisal, right? Now, if the offer came in at 310, let's say the list price was 310 and 10 grand in closing, now I've got a bigger challenge, because if I thought it was worth 310, I would have listed it for 310. So now here's somebody that needs 10 grand in closing costs, or they can't buy the home, and they're willing to throw 310 out there when basically they're just trying to win. Like, I don't have any guarantee that they would pay the 310, right? So now I have basically created a even higher appraisal burden, and the appraiser could come back and say, hey, I'll only sign off on 300. Then you've got yourself in a pickle, because now you're working with a buyer who's going to ask you to lower the price to 300 and still want the 10 grand. Make sense? In that scenario, again, everything kind of becomes negotiable again. And what I might say to the buyer is, you're welcome. What I might say to the buyer is, hey, we're all being asked to take a haircut here, so I need you to go back to the lender and see if you can raise the interest rate a little bit to lower the closing cost. Remember, those two things are opposite of one another, right? So the higher the closing cost, the lower the interest rate, and vice versa. So for example, if you were to go into a bank and say, hey, I want an interest rate of 2, like, okay, we can do that, but the closing costs are going to be $25,000, right? That's why closing costs, knowing what the interest rate is only half the discussion. You got to know what the interest rate is and what the closing costs are. Make sense? It's kind of like broker splits. I need to know the split, but I also need to know the cap, right? Because if one place is 80-20 no cap and the other place is 70-30 with the cap, I need to think about how much business I'm going to do. One may be better than the other, right? But if I'm going to make a couple $100,000, I want to be somewhere where I'm capping, because I don't want to pay you 20 or 30% uncapped. Does that make sense? Unless the value is there. All right. Any questions thus far? Okay, next we're going to talk about closing date. I always prefer, and lenders certainly prefer, for the possession to switch at closing. So you sit at the closing table, all the parties have met all their obligations, we all sign the paperwork, keys are delivered to the buyer, and they leave, and that home is theirs, and the seller never goes back, okay? The home, we'll say later in the contract, that the home will be delivered in, quote, broom swept condition, okay? That means that there's no requirement, unless it's additionally agreed upon, that the home would be professionally cleaned or something like that, but it should be in broom swept condition, which is free of, like, you know, debris and trash and, you know, these kind of things, right? Good rule of thumb is just leave it the way you'd want it left for you, right?
So what do you put, what's the date you put for closing date?
It depends. So generally speaking, a lender is going to be able to do a loan in about 30 to 35 days. So unless you are told otherwise, I would probably put between 30 and 35 days from then. So actually go back. So if it was today, for example, I might put a closing day of August 5th or something like that. Okay, but you want to make sure, obviously, only closings happen Monday through Friday, so nothing on the weekends. Okay, or federal holidays, like don't close on July 4th or Martin Luther King Day or Memorial Day or something like that. Okay, so you actually put a calendar date there and then check at closing. If by chance there's a document called the temporary occupancy agreement, not a huge fan of those, but every once in a while we have to do that. A temporary occupancy agreement is basically saying, let's say that the closing would happen on a Friday, and then the previous seller would box everything up over the weekend and move out. And then the keys would be delivered, let's say 2 days later on lunchtime on Monday, right? And the parties agree to hold the insurances and these kind of things. It's another exhibit. That's just introducing all kinds of mess. I prefer not to do that. Day of closing, you get the keys. You will likely be asked at some point in your career, oh, well, you know, the mover could only get here on this day. Can I just bring a bunch of crap and store it in the garage, you know, prior to closing? No. The answer to that is no. Okay. I did let it happen on my personal property, but I made a decision to do that. The guy brought in he had like one couch delivered or something. I didn't make a big deal about it. Okay. But they're not moving their moving truck and storing it in the garage, and then their loan goes bad and I got to deal with getting the guy's crap out of my house. Right. So generally speaking, the answer is no. You can have full access once you buy it, and you can have zero access until you buy it. Okay. Okay, next. Holder of the earnest money. Generally speaking, the buyer, obviously the buyer is going to be writing this offer, right? The buyer is generally going to choose the closing attorney. I believe that there are, you know, many closing attorneys are fully capable of doing their job. I do want, if it's not one I'm familiar with, I'm going to look them up. But I usually don't make such a fuss about that. I'm much more concerned generally with making sure my buyers or the pricing numbers are accurate, or whatever my client happens to be concerned about, right? Closing day or closing cost, or how much the earnest money is, or whatever it is. Okay. Holder of earnest money, if you get the opportunity, I would say Keller Williams Realty Consultants. That way we or Melba is the one that would decide on any type of discussion or argument or judgment on who retains the earnest money. Okay. Not that like they would make decisions based on who they like. It's just easier when you have control. Make sense? Okay, next. Closing attorney, same thing. Many closing attorneys. Oh, I already kind of talked about that. Many closing attorneys in town. O'Kelly and Sorahan is one of our preferred, and we are getting ready to, I don't think we've made a formal announcement on this, but we are getting into another alliance relationship with an attorney firm called Campbell and Brannon. And they will be providing us a lot of stuff as well. And that'll probably come out here in the next couple weeks, I suspect. That was just voted on by the ALC. Okay, earnest money, the amount of earnest money. This is negotiable. It is, it's really anything of value, but more, you know, 100% of the time, pretty much, it's money. Okay, and generally speaking, it is around 1%. It could be less, it could be more. If you're in multiple offers, that's one of the things I might push to get my buyer to agree to give a little bit more. However, it's generally around 1%. So if they're buying a $300,000 home, it's probably around $3 grand. Okay, this is the money that the buyer could lose if they're in violation of the contract. All right. Normally speaking, I would say, let's say $3,000 within 2 days of binding agreement or 3 days of binding agreement, something like that. Make sure that you give it enough time where you're not trying to run into the office on a Sunday or something to drop off a check. Okay. When the person brings in the earnest money, they would bring it in. Let's say if you're not at the office to greet them, then they would hand the earnest money check to Melody. Melody will go back and fill out a particular form and run a photocopy of it, and we'll put it through our system with the envelope and give it to Lucy, or not Lucy, Lee. And Melody will give you a copy and stamp it to say, hey, this has been received. And you can take that document and send that over to the seller to say, hey, we have met our obligation to be in receipt of the earnest money within a certain number of days. Okay, binding agreement is the date that both parties sign. Okay, day one is the following day. Make sense? So all the counts are going simultaneously, but day one is the day after binding agreement date. All right. Okay, section 8, due diligence. In Georgia, we have something called a due diligence period. Let me know if I'm being too basic here, guys. We have something called a due diligence period. Due diligence period allows. What was that?
A lot of echoing.
Yeah, hang on. See what's going on. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. State of Georgia, we have something called the due diligence period, which means that the buyer and seller would go under contract. The following day would be day one, and the buyer basically has the right to leave the contract for any reason, inspection related or otherwise, within a certain number of days. All the days, by the way, are calendar days. They're not weekends, holidays, or anything like that. It's just straight up calendar days, okay? Generally speaking, you're looking at somewhere between 7 and 14 days for the due diligence period. I like to see it around 10, okay? 10 to 12 or so. This is the opportunity for the buyer to continue to do any research that they have not yet done. Okay, that could include research on the commute times, whether it's in a floodplain, whether the home is in good shape from the termite inspection or the septic inspection or a standard home inspection or a radon inspection, or they've checked to see if any sex offenders live nearby, or they've checked the school data, they have looked to see who the neighbors are going to be, all these kind of things, right? Whatever research they may be using to determine whether they want to move forward with this purchase or not, that's their time to do it. Should they find anything that causes them to want to leave the contract, they are free to do so without penalty if it happens within that number of days. It does not need to be inspection related. Does that make sense?
Yes.
By the way, that should give the buyer a lot of confidence that they could go and put out an offer and kind of quote, see how it goes, because if it gets accepted and they end up finding a different home or a better home or something, they just leave the deal. No big deal. Okay. Again, they're not required to share the inspection report. It doesn't have to be inspection related, etc. Okay. Okay. By the way, that's not the case with new construction. We're just talking about resale right now. All right. So let's try to get that in the neighborhood of around 10 days or so. In situations where, like around COVID, for example, when some people were working, and even now some people aren't working, we're gonna just call the home inspector and say, hey, can you get out there within the next couple of days? If they can get out there within the next couple of days, then 10 days is probably fine. Don't wait until day 9 to send in the request. Send it in as quickly as you can. Be respectful and give the seller the appropriate amount of time to decide what they're going to do about it and to go get quotes and that kind of stuff. If you're asking for money or you're asking for stuff to get done, it's only appropriate that you give them a chance to determine how much that stuff's going to cost so they can agree to do it or not. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Section 8B2, seller shall pay additional option money. I have never filled that out, so I would just write NA there. Okay. That is essentially just additional money that a buyer might pay for the ability to go under contract non-refundable. Might be something you throw out there if you're in a competitive situation. I've never done that before. All right, section 9, lead-based paint. If it was the home built prior to 1978 or not, yes or no, you just check the appropriate box. Buyer relationship in the transaction. The selling broker, remember, is the broker that represents the buyer. So you would write Keller Williams Realty Consultants, listing broker, Coldwell Banker Residential Brokerage, whatever. Check the box that says they're working with the buyer or seller as a client. If and only if it is a designated agent, do you need to fill in your name on section 4 or check that. Follow? And don't forget that they ask a question about material relationship at the bottom. A material relationship is something that is something that, hang on.
Bill, you have to unmute yourself.
We can't hear you, Bill. Bill, we can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
How much of that did I say when you guys
Yes.
couldn't hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. Material relationship is anything that needs to be disclosed. Okay. So an example of that is like my brother is the realtor, or I hold an active real estate license in a different state or something, or one of the buyers does. Anything that is like any form of family relationship, that kind of thing. A good example of that, I actually asked Aubrey about this the other day, is so I helped a buyer buy a home about 13 years ago. They just put the home on the market, not using me, which is a whole different story, but I had a different buyer that wanted to see it. So I said, do I need to disclose that I know the seller and I've had a relationship with the seller in the past? And he said, it's probably a little fuzzy, but I would disclose it. And I was planning on disclosing. It's not that big of a deal. But that was something, we didn't end up buying the home, but that was something that is kind of one of these unique situations where I feel it's necessary. Make sense? All right. Don't forget the buyer and seller need to initial at the bottom of page number 1. Again, please take the time to read through this contract, right? It is the buyer's duty to inspect, right? It is the buyer's duty to check the sex registry list. It is not your job to determine if the neighborhood is safe or, you know, good schools or bad schools, or no, it's the guy was only looking at internet porn, not, you know, something more serious. No. You're a deliverer of the information. They decide. Make sense? Here's a website to see where the sex offenders list. Okay.
Can you go over number 11?
All right. So you keep going down. This is the second to last page. This is where you include all the exhibits that are part of the contract. So remember, you're probably going to have a couple of the following exhibits. Number 1 is the legal description, right? Number 2 is the community association.
Can you address number 11 too?
The seller's property disclosure state, if applicable, whatever loan contingency, right? FHA, conventional, lead-based paint, if it's applicable, legal description, as I said, and any others that may be applicable. And here's where you write your special stipulations. Now, there's not much space in special stipulations in the purchase and sale now. So if necessary, you would just bring in another contract called additional page. And it would be like additional page 1 of purchase and sale agreement dated, you know, June 29th or whatever. And you would check this box here saying additional special stipulations are attached. Make sense? Okay, then we can go back to that other document here where we're looking at common special stipulations. So common special stipulations might be like, you know, getting a home warranty and taking a look at all the disclosure statements if you haven't already gotten them, and getting a termite coverage, or you know, some of these kind of things. Okay, servicing the HVAC system, providing receipts for any repairs, these kind of things. Make sense? So that is where did I have this? Okay. Any questions on that? Next page is the signature
11.
page. Remember, this is where, for the brokers, right, this is where you put Keller Williams Realty Consultants, your name or your signature, your printed name, all of your details here, real estate number, email, and all that. You have a fax number, you can put the fax number there. These are acceptable ways to communicate things about the file with you, okay? Do not, in my opinion, fill out the buyer's or seller's contact information here. This is where it does not belong, in my opinion. I do not want there to be any chance of the other party speaking to my guy without me being involved. Okay? And then once the file is binding, once the contract is binding, then it would be completed here, and it would be stated what date the binding agreement date is. Any questions on the purchase and sale?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Kristen, did you have a question? I thought I saw your mouth move.
Can you go back up to number 11?
Oh, hang on 1 second. 1 second. All right, say that again.
Somebody wanted you to go over number 11.
1 sec. Why is this not? All right, try now.
Somebody wanted you to go over number 11 on the front page.
Can anyone hear her?
Yeah,
We can all
I
hear.
can hear. You just can't hear us.
All kinds of sound issues. Okay, can you hear me now?
Well,
Yeah,
I
we
can
can
hear
hear
you.
Okay, say something.
We're here.
Hello?
You can't hear us. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
I skipped section 11. Did somebody say that?
Yes.
No, 1 sec. Sorry, everything is going out of. Oh, time limit. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Okay, time limit. This is there's some strategy involved in this. Okay, I tend to think that I would give people at least a day. Let's just call it roughly 24 hours. Okay. In situations where, let's say you give somebody a day. Okay. That gives the other party time to go solicit offers. So like if I get an offer from you, Kristen, and Angela showed the home, last night or something, I could call her and say, hey, we just got an offer. You got, I need an offer from you in the next, 3 hours, or I'm going to have to work with this offer, right? They can go and solicit other offers, which might create a multiple offer situation, which might prevent you from getting the home or your client from having to pay more money, right? Or give tighter terms. So you want to find that balance between getting a quick answer and giving them time to like think about it, if you will. I'd say about an hour or about a day is about right. Okay. If you know it's multiple offers, you can probably give it a couple days. That way everyone has time for the deadline. The time limit is basically how much time how long is the offer as written, exactly as written, available to be signed. So for example, if an offer comes into me and I'm on the listing side, and let's say the deadline is tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. So if I'm not planning to accept that offer verbatim, it almost doesn't matter what the deadline is. But in order to prevent the parties from having to like come up with some additional dialogue saying the offer is still valid, I just want to reply before 5 p.m. tomorrow. Make sense? I once had an offer on a property, and this agent did something that in hindsight was pretty smart, but it kind of pissed me off. He sent me an offer at like 8 o'clock at night and gave me like 3 hours to accept it. And it was the very first day that the home was on the market. And I called him and I said, like, really? You want like 3 hours? It's like almost midnight. He's like, Bill, this is the best offer you're ever going to get. Just sign it. And that kind of pissed me off. And I went to my client and I actually told her that I thought she should not sign it. And it was the best offer. And we ended up selling the house for $2,000 less, like a month later. Right? I didn't like that tactic, but anything goes. Okay. Any questions on time limit? All right. Okay. How we feeling?
Bill, I do have a question about the time limit. So you give somebody a time limit, and I've ran into this several times where you've given a time limit, like you said, you normally give the 24 hours. Sometimes I've given, 24 to 48 hours, just depends. But now I've been just giving 24 hours because I know it's a multiple offer situation on most, homes that are on the market these days as well. But what happens when you give that time limit and you get no response?
Well, the other party is technically under no obligation to respond within your time limit. It really just becomes a dialogue with you and the other party to say, hey, did you receive it? Any questions about it? Is there, does your client need more time? Right? Are they out of town? Is there anything that I'm not aware of that's preventing them from responding in a reasonable amount of time? You're really only as good of a negotiator as your next best option. So if I say, hey, you got a deadline of tomorrow at 5, and they call me back and said, hey, it's going to have to be Wednesday at 5 because my person's not available, I say, okay, whatever. We still want the house. Right? But if the other party is like, well, why can't they respond within? You're like, dude, this is not in your control. Either you want the house.
Yeah.
Are you gonna be cooperative or are you gonna be rude? Right. But at some point, you have to decide under what circumstances are you willing to continue this negotiation.
Right. Okay.
Everything, again, you're as good of a negotiator as your next best option. I've told this story many times. Like when my wife and I bought the home that we live in right now, I was not a good negotiator. Okay. I got the house, which is what we really wanted. But did I overpay? Yeah, probably I did, because the home was not available, or was not available in the open market. It was off-market home. And I basically, this was my negotiation strategy. I said, hey, how much do you want so that you don't show this to anyone else? That was basically our negotiation strategy, which I don't recommend. But I didn't want anyone else to buy the home.
Yeah.
Right? And so I basically had to pay him more than he would get from the open market to prevent him from going to the open market. Okay, let's talk about a contingency with a kick-out. Donna, do you want to ask your question specifically?
Yeah, I had a potential buyer visiting the open house this weekend, and she said as she was searching for homes, and I didn't get into the specifics of where she saw this, she said she saw a few times that it said there was a contingency with a kick-out clause. And she wanted me to explain it to her, and I wasn't quite sure what that meant. And I promised to get back to her, which I did. I spoke with Jan and Pam and Kathy to get an explanation. And I provided that to the buyer, but I thought it might be something important to go over now so that everybody's familiar with that term.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so hopefully I'll give an answer that's as good as the one Pam gave. Okay, here's the deal with the kick-out. That is like saying, let's say I'm the seller, you're the buyer, you submit an offer and it has a contingency. Let's say the contingency is that in order to buy my house, you have to sell yours. And so you'll close theoretically in the morning on a certain day, and then you'll take your proceeds and come to the closing office and buy my property. Okay. So a contingency with a kick-out is a little bit more flexibility for me, because it basically allows you and I to go under contract. However, if I get another offer, then I go back to you and say, you have, let's say, 72 hours to remove your contingency. Or I have the ability to negotiate this new offer. Because, do you see what I'm saying? So you would then remove the contingency, which doesn't necessarily, like, you still have to sell your home in order to buy. But if you don't sell your home, well, let me rephrase that. If you don't buy my home, then you run the risk of losing your earnest money or getting sued, right? So you release yourself from the ability to get out of the contract if your home doesn't sell.
So is that put into the counteroffer? Or how do you?
That would be put into, well, at that point it would be an offer.
Right, so the contingency part is in the buyer's offer.
Right.
Does the buyer also include the piece about the kick-out, or does the seller come back with a counteroffer, like accepting the contingency but with the kick-out?
That's a really good question. That would generally come from the seller. Is that the way you were explained it?
We didn't get into that detail. The first part that you explained was basically what the three other agents said, but I wasn't sure where the actual kick-out piece is recorded. So That was Kristen's question, I think, and you answered that. So there's a counteroffer from the seller accepting the contingency along with the kickout.
Well, it's a different contingency, if you will.
Okay.
Like it's a contingency with kickout rather than just a regular old contingency.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Kickout gives the seller a little bit of freedom because then they can go back to the buyer and say, hey, this person is ready to buy the home without the contingency, and I need you to remove yours. Right?
How would that be written for the seller if they're accepting the offer?
There's a GAR form for that.
Okay.
Spells it all out. Yeah. Like I'll give you another example. Like, let's say that's why earnest money is so important, right? Because if I, for example, end up not being able to, let's say, Donnie, you can't buy my home because you couldn't sell yours, right? So maybe that you couldn't sell yours because the buyer defaulted and you took $3,000 in earnest money because your home's worth 300 grand, but you're buying mine for 500 grand. So then, because you can't then buy my home, then it offsets the loss. Like you lose 5 from not being able to buy my home, but you get 3 because the guy caused the whole mess. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
You're kind of mitigating the loss, if you will. Now that's a better scenario than losing the home entirely, but it's not as good of a scenario as being able to retain the contingency. Makes sense? Like when I submitted my offer, when we bought this last house, I put in a contingency to sell my home. They kind of ultimately balked at that. They're like, we don't really want to agree to that. And I was so afraid that they were going to put the home on the market and somebody else buy it that I said, don't worry about it. And I could have bought it without selling the other home, although I really didn't want to. But that's ultimately what happened. Okay. Okay. I know there's plenty of other contracts we can go through. Let's call it a day on this one, and we will continue to go through the paperwork for contracts bit by bit. We have there are videos in the YouTube library about FHA and conventional financing exhibits, and there's also videos on Facebook that Susan's done on all these contracts as well. Any feedback on the way we covered this? Is it helpful to look at the contract while I'm explaining it? Any feedback, good or bad, on how we did today?
It's
It was
helpful.
good.
I think it's helpful.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Okay. All right, beautiful. Let me know. Give me just a second. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Close the door, please. Close the door, please. Okay, so by the way, I'll put this video on YouTube here momentarily, and YouTube is completely updated, even including this morning's session. So if you want to go back and watch any of the stuff that we've done, it is available for you, including like the session with Kim last week and Peggy last week, and all the morning sessions and 4-in-1s and economic models and profit share.
Where on YouTube, Bill?
There's a link for there's a productivity coaching only YouTube page that we put out there. So I think I mentioned to you before, if ultimately you decide to come on board, then you'll have access to that right away. But
Okay.
basically everything that we do, it's all videoed and stored, so you can go back and watch it as frequently as you want.
And you included a link to that in the weekly email, right?
I did. I believe I haven't always done that because I usually send it out when somebody first joins, but I just started to include it to make it easier. So yes, the short answer to that is yes. You can go back and look at the email from yesterday and see. So I think Kristen, you technically have the email or the link. But that's where the videos are all stored. So there's 3 or 4 months of videos in there. Okay.
Thanks.
All right, everyone. This was fun. I hope this was helpful. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.